Greetings, or as the Vodalian merfolk say, the Explorers of the Deep is such a nice commander precon that came out with the Lost Caverns of Ixalan set, but there is so many merfolk that weren't included in it. But when merfolk tribals comes to mind, it's human mercenary card that should be a must include. Sea Hunter pretty much casts merfolks directly out of your library. Cast it for 4 mana, and once the summoning sickness is over, it's tap and 3 mana to fetch whatever piece of puzzle for winning the game you're missing. This piece might be Alandra Skydreamer. While she doesn't fit the theme of the precon's commanders with her drakes, these are a game changer, especially when you're playing blue, so a lot of extra card drawing should occur on your turns. It doesn't have to be from the recently reprinted but still pricey Rhystic Study. You have Dakra Mystic to fill in your merfolk ranks, for example, and a ton of card drawing spells. Add Talrand Sky Summoner for more drakes joining the party. What is the most feared merfolk? True name Nemesis. This card has a history of winning games in any deck that has blue in its commander's identity. And now, you can make it benefit from being in the merfolk gang. That will make it so much stronger thanks to tribal advantage given by, for example, Lord of Atlantis. The merfolk classic that used to hit the wallets as hard as it hits the opponents, but he's coming back with a new print in the special guests as a rare. Even better than the Lord of Atlantis is Vodalian Hexcatcher. Not only do you get the +1s from your merfolk, you'll get that nice intimidation mechanic against spells that could potentially cost you losing the game. Keep sacrificing merfolk to counter that spell eventually, or just make that option a way to keep your opponents from casting a mana heavy spell that could hugely benefit them. On the subject of counterspells, Curse Catcher is no Thalia Guardian of Thraben, but that little guy keeps your opponents in check with making them keep 1 mana open as they cast their big spells. Another big name merfolk that brings disarray on the table and salt from commander players that suddenly faced getting their commanders snatched is Empress Galina. A must include in a decent merfolk tribal that borrows stuff from your opponents for the low mana cost of 2 blue and doesn't give it back at the end of the turn because the effect is permanent. Unlike Overtaker, the cheaper option, yet still valid and very useful in a merfolk tribal deck. A very peculiar merfolk trait is Unblockable, which was completely neglected in the precon. If you want to go that route and gain a lot of advantage from hitting your opponent with something, you'll have a wide choice of unblockables. That ranges from the Mercadian Mask classic Blockade Runner to making other creatures unblockable for a rather high mana cost with Coral Helm Guide to dropping that 6 mana Deep Channel Mentor that gives it to all of your blue creatures, which is great considering almost every creature you have in your deck is blue. Among them, the bluest and extra turniest of them, the Wonderwine Prophets. With these guys, it's Groundhog's Day for your opponent, where every turn is yours from that moment on, as long as you have a merfolk to sacrifice. There's also something that gives you the key to making deals with other players. With Mist Color on the table, you'll have your opponents literally asking you for permission to cast their creatures. If you want some unusual plays, you can bring in Saprazan Air and do some shenanigans with cards like Colossification to make the other players want to block it, even though you'll draw cards because of it. Make your creature more blockable instead of the classic merfolk unblockable. Speaking of classic merfolk traits, a classic merfolk weakness is that they generally don't fly. You can correct it with Color of Gales and even make flying your board advantage with the very powerful but very mana expensive Frostwind Invoker. We have one Tatyova card in the precon, but there's another that's quite neat. Tatyova, Steward of Tides, uses the advantage of having a lot of lands on your battlefield and turns them into flying creatures, plus only 3 mana to cast for a 3/3 merfolk. Even cheaper to cast is Thrasios, Triton Hero, 2 mana to gain an outlet for the lands to start pouring onto the battlefield. World Shaper completes the land gang, and don't let that 4 mana cost fool you. It's when you already have a lot of lands on the table when it proves most useful, especially if there's some self-mill involved or even better, an opponent milling you. Waker of the Wilds wasn't included in the precon and it benefits greatly from the abundance of lands later in the match. You might want to add the Waker to your squad. Since almost all of your creatures are merfolk, Slyn Voda the Rising Deep is the MVP for late game, which clears whatever is standing between your merfolk and your opponents. Alternatively, you can go the old Thassa's Oracle route, although it would require some massive alterations to the precon to spec it for the win con, yet the merfolk itself is a very useful addition because of its top of the library selection. Now let's focus on the supplementation. But before we continue, be sure to like the video if you found it helpful. Thanks for that. Back to the subject. The Explore fans probably noticed that Jadelight Ranger is missing in the precon, a must-have for Twins and Turns and Topography Tracker synergy. With both of them on the table, the Ranger would explore 4 times and scry either 2 or 4 times, depending on the order you choose. If you feel like the 1-1 counter aspect is somewhat lacking in the deck, Combined Guildmage can supplement it a little bit. Not great, but also not bad. You can also include Vineshaper Mystic. For creature ramp, we have the almost forgotten Mirage era Merfolk card Sea Scryer, a much better mana dork than the more recent Vodalian Arcanist in my opinion. As for protection, since you're playing blue, you have Slip Out the Back at your disposal, and a lot of spells like it, but also something even better. Vodalian Illusionist is the underdog protector from the Weatherlight era, not as amazing as a Mother of Runes, but blue, so in line with your commander's color identity, and a merfolk in addition. Once you have an army of powerful merfolk, you might want to attack your opponents and flood them with your creatures. Tempest Color is plain nasty when it taps all of your opponent's defenses. There's a more permanent and more versatile way to sneak past your opponent's creatures too, although it requires a bit of tinkering with the deck to allow some more possibilities. It becomes easier if your opponents already play islands, but if they don't, you have cards like Lingering Mirage or Sea's Claim at your disposal. There's even a merfolk who used to dwell in the dark waters of Wrath during the Stronghold era that turns your opponent's lands into islands. What for, you might ask? To use all the value Island World gives your deck, starting with cards like Fada Adel Acquisitor, but also some obscure cards even from the Fallen Empires era. Not necessarily Vodalian Knights, but since you're already turning lands into islands, there's nothing standing in your way to start using Sea Singer, a very underrated card from the olden days, which allows you to borrow something from among your opponent's creatures. The cherry on top, Stormtide Leviathan can prove the total package you need for the Island World gang and might even secure you a win. Are there any other improvements that you've discovered and want to share? The comment section is open for you below. Have an amazing day and catch you in another video.